Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's very nice to have you all here. My name is Chiara Martinuzzi. I work for the Global Public Space Program at UN Habitat, and I'm gonna be here very honored to moderate this beautiful panel. And the session of today is about the role of the nature-based solution and its application through public spaces for urban health. And particularly, we're going to also focus on biodiversity. I won't talk much about the session of today because I think we have a lot of beautiful voices here that have a lot to say. But the idea was actually to bring attention on the thematic and raise awareness about the importance of nature-based solution for urban health and what are the tools and the method and the approaches that are there out already that we can learn from. I would like before giving the word to Jose, actually, I would like to just quickly do some housekeeping. The session will last 1 hour and a half. There's going to be a quick introduction, a keynote from Jose, but then we're going to jump into the panel that is nicely shaped between different voices from FAO, ARUP, ICLEI, and WLSP and UN Habitat. I would ask everyone to mute themselves if they're not speaking, and in case they would like to intervene, to raise their hands and write question in the chat. We will give awards to, there will be a session afterwards for asking questions, but if you feel like you have a burning question right after the presentation, you can also raise your hands and I will give you the word. With that said, I would like to introduce Jose Chong, who's the head of the Global Public Space Program at UN Habitat. He's been working as an architect in urban planning for UN Habitat, and he's focused specifically on the topic of public spaces and urban development. And today he will, set the scene and tell us a bit more about this. Jose, I'll give you the word.
Thanks a lot, Chiara, for the presentation, and thanks a lot for also the speakers for being part of the session today. I wanted to discuss very quickly about the importance of public space, but also focusing on the issue of urban health, nature-based solutions, and biodiversity. So with that, I wanted to start the presentation. Let me see if it's working. Yes, it's fine. So I wanted to start with this slide, and I will provide like a certain statistics about the importance of urban health in general, and also the importance of public space. I wanted to start with certain statistics about housing and sanitation. And it's quite difficult when we are talking about health and urbanization, when we are talking, when we are seeing like what is happening with the world, no? Like when we have like a 2.4 billion inhabitants that are living with a lack of adequate access to safe water and sanitation. And when we have like around 1 billion people living in informal settlements and slums around the world. When we are talking about air quality, we have around 88% of the urban population that is exposed to air quality levels that exceeds what are the recommendations of the World Health Organization. And also this increase that is increasing the risk of respiratory diseases and other health problems. Around 7 million deaths globally are attributed to joint effects of households and ambient air pollution. This was a statistic like for 2016. And when we are talking about physical activity, that is quite important when we are talking about urban health, 1 in 4 adults and 4 out of 5 adolescents globally do not meet the recommendation of the World Health Organization regarding what is the amount of physical activity that you have to practice daily. And it is estimated that this causes around 44 billion US dollars. This is related to direct healthcare costs, but also it's like around 14 billion US dollar that is more related to the loss of productivity. So in a nutshell, what is happening with the statistics around the world, it seems like there is poor physical activity, lack of conditions like on urbanization and housing, and also like as we will see a little bit later, what is happening with the status of public space around the world. So there is a linkage that I wanted to make in this presentation and in this session, that green and public space networks are quite important when we are talking about urban health, and also when we look at like through the lens like from ecology, but also from nature-based solutions applies in cities. I wanted to highlight here like there are like some important factors. We are dealing like from UN Habitat more on the spatial considerations. We are talking about, for example, land use that is from the city, the urban form and the design of the blocks, the streets, and the public spaces. When we are talking about transport and movement networks, so it's like there are cities that are car-oriented and others like it's like allow like a more like a pedestrian movements. But also when we are talking about the green, blue, and public space networks, so it's quite fundamental, these special considerations and factors. And this is related to public health in a sense that these special considerations and factors can protect like from harm. No, for instance, we are talking about air pollutions, noise disturbance, and exposure like to different risks. Also, how the urban form and the special consideration, how the city can promote health. We are talking about, for instance, like practicing physical activities every day. Also food and healthy food options, and also inclusion in our city, but also where we are talking about providing services. No, for instance, accessible health facilities and also open spaces. So it's like this has an effect, like for instance, when we are talking about physical health, that that is quite important, mental health, that actually like during the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw like the importance of the accessibility of a green space, and also more important, like a health equity. So it's like a different health facilities, or like a different accessibility like to health services that is coming up like from like the distribution and the urban development processes. So it's like from the United Nations, and also we have a colleague like from FAO who will touch base probably on the importance of SDGs, like we are promoting the Sustainable Development Goals, and it's like we have a specific goal SDGs. Actually, like these two goals are very interrelated to the other one. So this is quite fundamental, like since we are focusing here like on the relation between health and public spaces and urban development in general. Wanted to highlight when we are talking about public health and green spaces, and I was mentioning that before, that there are like a certain benefits when we are talking about how like a urban form can encourage, like for example, for the people to use non-motorized transport to have like a more physical activities, but also like these and can also allow to reduce behavioral and neurological disorders. But in addition, like some of the benefits when we're talking about green spaces is like to increase biodiversity and in general build ecological health. That means like to have an holistic approach to health in general, but also like certain effects that are more directly, like for example, like a reduction of the of the temperatures in cities, clean the air, reduction of pollution, and other benefits that is like both like a good network of green spaces can have and produce in a city. I wanted to focus more like talking about nature-based solutions that is quite important when we are talking about the green and blue corridors in our systems. And I wanted to highlight like on this definition that is coming up like from the International Union for Conservation of Nature. So nature-based solutions are the different actions to protect, manage, and restore natural and modified ecosystems. So they are quite important because they can provide human well-being and provide also biodiversity benefits. So it's quite important when we are talking about urban development, it's like to incorporate nature-based solutions. And here, like a certain statistics about the importance of using nature-based solutions in cities, like for example, in average, nature-based solutions are 50% more cost-effective than other alternatives or more traditional alternatives. Also, it's like I can reduce the heat island effect, reducing that surface temperature by 5 degrees to 20 degrees, depending on the context. But also, it can create an amount of jobs that is based on nature-based solutions. And this is quite important when we are looking about urban economy. So in general, there is a lot of work like to do when we are talking about nature-based solution. That the statistics mentioned that in 2020 that we just received like a 0.3% of the percentage of the overall spending on urban infrastructure that is related to nature-based solutions. So there is a niche that actually we can work. And actually, what we are talking about nature-based solutions in cities, there is a lot that are related to public space and also the built-up form and actually housing and buildings. So we are talking about the streets, greening streets. We are talking about also green walls. We are talking about a green roof, and also all these different mechanisms and solutions that we can implement in our cities. I wanted to highlight on this one, when we're talking about nature-based solutions for ecosystem restoration, and actually now we are in the decade for ecosystem restoration, that nature-based solutions has a certain benefits when we are talking about biodiversity. For instance, when we're talking about green roof, we can have a urban agriculture, but also it allows to have different species in the green and blue corridors, and the importance, for example, of pollinators, and also to allow and to continue with these natural corridors for wildlife that is quite important. Another benefits that I was highlighting before, this is one of the most important benefits. I was highlighting that reduction of the temperature of the surface that we're having in cities, but also this has collateral effects, for example, the reduction of the use of energy for air conditioning in particularly in tropical weathers. And also flood control, no? For example, there was a tendency to have artificial river banks, and now is that there is many cities that are having a more renaturalization of urban rivers and river banks for flood control. No, here are some images as a reference. And is also when we are talking about sustainable development goals, there is a lot of relations when we are talking about nature-based solutions, and it's basically we will be touching about some goals, goal 3 on health, goal 6 on clean water and sanitation, goal 9 on industry innovation, goal 11, of course, and 13 in climate action, and goal 15 on life on land. So I think this is quite fundamental that both when we are talking about health and when we are talking about nature-based solutions and green public space benefits, actually we are touching with many different sustainable development goals. So, and what we are doing, from UN Habitat side, actually I'm leading the Global Public Space Program, and we are working on all these topics related to public space. If you wanted to have more information, please check on the link. But from this work that we are doing, supporting cities on how to improve the green and public space network in their cities, I wanted to highlight that it's like a UN Habitat is a custodian agency of SDG 11.7.1 that is related to public space, no? And we are working closely, like with colleagues, working on urban health benefits of green and blue public networks and corridors. So from the findings, actually, like from the database that we have of around 1,500 cities around the world of what is happening on the situation of open and green public spaces around the world, it's like in average, we found that cities are allocating like a very few amount of land to public space and streets. So in average, we have that the world in urban areas is like we are allocating around 16% of the land allocated to streets and open spaces. And these are different like between the different regions, like between Oceania, Australia, and also North America, etc. And it's like in average, what we are promoting at least like to have around 15% of the land allocated to streets and open spaces and public facilities in our city. So it's like it means like we are quite far away like from this benchmark. But actually also when we are talking about equity, we are talking about accessibility to these public spaces, because it's not only about quantity, but also it's like what we are measuring is like accessibility to an open space that is 400 meters away from the public space. That means like a 5 minutes walk. And actually, it's also we are seeing like a great disparities between the different regions. So in general, in average, it's like in cities, we have that around 46% of the population living in city has an access like to an open public space, 5 minutes walk from the place of residence. So it's actually a very low percentage, and it's something that we have to work more. And obviously, like there are like some regional difference when we are talking about this accessibility. More when we are talking about, for example, the quality of that accessibility. It's not only about the amount or like the proximity, but also if you have like the good accessibility with universal design to be able like to access to open and green spaces in cities. So to finalize, it's like I only wanted to give a summary of the work that we are doing on health, starting like from the United Nations policy brief, like when we have the COVID-19 pandemic still is going on. So it's like please be aware, but also this is a quite important publication, Integrating Health in Urban and Territorial Planning, a source book. Like this was a joint publication with the World Health Organization and UN Habitat, like with a lot of tools, like principal recommendations and case studies, and also a report on cities and pandemic, like coming up like from UN Habitat site, and certain publications and policy brief like coming up like from the Global Public Space Program, using nature-based solutions in public spaces to enhance resilience, and also some guidelines like about COVID-19 and public space. So I wanted to end up, Chiara, maybe like to pointing out like the question like for discussions. And I wanted to summarize like for us, like it's quite important when we are talking about health equity, the network of green and public space. We believe that green spaces and public space can contribute actually for the well-being and the health of the citizens, but there is a lot of things like still like to be done, and we argue that this is quite important, and we need to do it like through the network of partners and practitioners. So thanks a lot, and it's like looking forward like for this productive discussion during the panel. Over to you, Chiara.
Thank you so much, Jose. I think it's always good to start also with some numbers and understanding what's the impact also financially of our choices in urban planning and how public spaces can actually make a tangible difference. So thanks a lot for just sharing a bit of information on that. We're gonna definitely go back to this question at the end of the panel, but I would like to give the floor to our panelists first, and we're gonna start from Simone Borelli. Simone has worked for the Food Agriculture Organization of the UN for the last 80 years in different positions, and is currently responsible for the urban forestry and the forestry division. He provides technical support to FAO fields projects and provide policy advice to member countries and develop technical publication. He also had worked for the WWF and the so-called now Biodiversity International, and is consultant for public of institution and private sector. He will particularly talk with us about trees, cities, and people. So I'll give you the word to you, Simone.
Yes, thank you, Chiara. In fact, I'll talk about trees, cities, people, and the pandemic. I think that's a good sequitur from what Jose closed with, so I think it fits very nicely. Now, let me see how I can go forward with the slides here. Okay, looks like me and Jose picked the same picture at different times. So I guess this was what San Francisco looked like before the pandemic, and this more what it looked like afterwards. So I think in the end, we have a clear idea of what has happened over the last let's say 2.5 years or whatever. So definitely there's been a change in the way in which we perceive public space and the way in which we can interact and let's say use the space. Of course, now the situation is not so drastic, but I think this has changed our way of perceiving public space forever. Now, what is health? And I think Jose mentioned it in passing, but health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not just the absence of disease or infirmity. So I think what we really need to take care of is that we're not looking at curing things, we're looking at mostly preventing, or at least trying to reduce the impact of, let's say, the urbanization on health and well-being of people. Now, I think Jose also highlighted a little bit of the main challenges of health in cities. And I would like to focus on essentially 4 different challenges in which we feel that trees and nature-based solutions can play an important role in, let's say, reducing the impact, and that's air pollution, physical inactivity, the immune system, and of course, mental health. Now, unfortunately, this is what many landscapes look like in a number of our countries, and air pollution, as Jose mentioned already, plays a really critical role in the health of people. How does it impact people? Basically, it's fine particles impact a large number of different aspects of our health, including lungs, the brain, the heart, the vascular system, even reproduction, and so on. And so they really have an important, or let's say, impact on our health. And in fact, I think Jose mentioned this already, around 7 million deaths are actually due to the exposure to outdoor and household air pollution, really creating strokes, heart problems, lung cancer, and so on. And once again, the distribution of these impacts is also quite clearly not equal along the different regions. In fact, you can see that Southeast Asia has the highest impact, Western Pacific also a high impact, and so on. So once again, climate equity and health equity, and climate justice and health justice go together quite closely. Now, there's been a number of studies, some done by the Nature Conservancy, which has really highlighted how trees can be a solution for reducing the impact of air pollution, and they call it planting healthy air. And it's really about how trees can really act as, in a way, carbon sinks, but also as filters, and let's say reduce the impact of contaminants. And also importantly, they've done an economic study to see how investment in trees is actually a good investment. You can really look at how money saved in healthcare could be reused for funding, let's say, trees and nature-based solutions. And of course, I also like to mention there's a lot of coalitions now. There's a global coalition, I think, supported by the UN. There's also local, let's say, coalitions trying to reduce the impact of contaminants on our health. I think Jose also showed this the way we engineer our cities, the way we design our cities, and the way in which we strategically use green infrastructure and nature-based solutions also has an important role in reducing our exposure to contaminants. So by reducing the canyon effect or planting trees and shrubs and other plants strategically along the roads and along up our buildings can also help reduce the impact of direct impact of contaminants, but also help disperse contaminants through channeling of winds and air currents. Once again, the trees can be close to buildings, can reduce heart attacks, strokes, and asthma, and used as barriers between the main highways can really improve the air quality of neighborhoods. One study I saw recently done in Kentucky, in Louisville, shows that the difference, and here we go back to the idea of health justice, of life expectancy of neighborhoods that are, let's say, protected or less exposed to contaminants can be up to 8 years. So basically, people that live in highly contaminated neighborhoods live on average 8 years less than those that live in cleaner neighborhoods. So I think that's an important consideration. Once again, there's lots of different designs, looking at effectivity of green infrastructure. And we also have to be careful how we design the structures to ensure that the, let's say, effectiveness is maximized. Once again, looking at, the level of pollution and the height and width of the structures, we also have to decide what we can actually do in terms of planning and, let's say, designing green infrastructure to reduce air pollution. Physical activity, once again, I think Jose mentioned the cost or the incredible cost of physical inactivity. And so really it's important that we start planning green spaces in a way that there's sufficient space for people to relax, shall we say, but also to take exercise, even sometimes a little strenuous up the hills here in Brazil. We're really trying to make sure that people do have the possibility and accessibility. I think that's an important point, to actually be able to do physical exercise as much as possible, be it walking, be it cycling, or be it having sort of more engineered structures with paths on which people can actually take their physical activity. Now, the other important aspect I wanted to mention is that of immune system, and that I think Jose maybe did not mention so much, and it's really about how biodiversity has a strong influence on our endobiome, or let's say all the microorganisms that live on us or inside us. And it's been proven that, let's say, all these different organisms really provide an important contribution to our immune system. And in fact, there's children that don't, it's been proven that children that do have exposure to nature have a much stronger immune system and a lot less likely to suffer from allergies, for example. So increasingly, there's a body of evidence that shows that public spaces need to be used actively at an early age in particular, to make sure that our immune system is more resilient to external shocks. I think Jose also mentioned the need to have blue and green infrastructure. That's important from different points of view, biodiversity, but also from literally the aesthetical perception of nature, which helps us relax and improves mental health. In fact, people seem to have a preference for spaces that have a mixed nature. And coming to the design, there's also a lot of work about designing our cities to actually strengthen our immune system. So really creating the linking up somehow the soil microbiome with the aerial biome, the plant biome, and the human actual microbiome. So these microbiomes, if we design our buildings and cities properly, interact in a continuous manner and really can help us improve our immune system, and of course, our resilience to diseases. There are, of course, some counterindications of planting trees. Some people are allergic, and so you have to be sure that, or careful when you're actually planting different trees, that you minimize the risk to health. Now, I think we all had pretty strong experience in the last 2 years with our keeping our mental health, shall we say, to the extent possible. And once again, exposure or contact with nature does have important, let's say, impacts on our mental health, on our mental capacity to react in times of crisis. And people have been using this in different ways, you know, doing meditation, even though it's in a circle, you're still out in the open air. And it's been also proven that having a window outside your house, outside your hospital room, can have beneficial effects on people's health. In fact, some seminal studies from the 70s proved that people that have a tree outside the hospital room heal much faster than those that don't. And I think we all know that if you look outside a window and see a tree, you feel on average much happier than if you don't have a tree or a motorway. And exposure to biodiversity can come in many forms, and people really interact as much as possible in nature. Here, I think they're just catching probably frogs or something, but it's really about being immersed in nature that can really help us. I think there are several theories about the biophilic, let's say, attitude of human beings. So being in contact with nature is also important. And designing structures around hospitals also going to help us, make life easier for patients. But how do we react in times of crisis? What happened? We closed the parks. We started putting up signs to keep, in the park, but 6 feet apart, creating circles and squares in the parks. Once again, barriers of all kinds. So we seem to be going against all common sense. In fact, some countries, and this is, I think, examples from New Zealand and England, really in the past been pushing for the role of nature or green prescriptions instead of medical prescriptions. And suddenly we decided that no, nature is not good. We don't go out. We have to stay locked in our homes. And so there seems to be a contradiction in terms of how we actually reacted to the pandemics. Now, there's also been some important research, and these are a couple of examples. This is one from Spain, from Pedro Calasa, about how green infrastructure is actually a public health system. And so we need not forget that. So in times of crisis like pandemic, we should maybe react differently. And yes, we need to make sure people don't get in touch too much or not too close, but closing parks, it seemed to be an extreme or maybe not very useful reaction. Some designs of what the future of parks might look like. This is a one-way park designed in Vienna. It was designed like a fingerprint, but you can only go one way. And I think that's pretty lonely to go one way in the park without meeting people. So we have to also be careful not to make our designs of the future too extreme. We need to make sure that designs really cater to the fact that people can sit down, be outside, but not be isolated, or try to include green or trees infrastructure in our buildings to make sure we have a greener future in this respect. I touched briefly upon the SDGs. I think Jose mentioned most of them. I'd like to focus here once again on the fact that trees and nature-based solutions can help health and well-being. Of course, it can help us address SDG 11. In fact, Jose, for your let's say a comment later on, I've seen recently a icon of the SDG symbol with trees, which seems to be actually missing on this icon here. So maybe we should push to have at least a couple of trees thrown into that picture. And of course, as you see from this picture, inequality in terms of access to green space and the benefits that green spaces provide is still very large, and we need to address that to complete. So this is probably what we would like our cities to look like, but this is what the reality is right now. I think we still have a lot of work ahead of us, and we need to make sure that this situation is addressed in time. Let me just take the opportunity to announce quickly that next year we will be holding the second World Forum on Urban Forests, more or less 1 year from now. So it's organized by FAO and its partners in the US. And so keep an eye on this, and we'll be sending out more information in the coming weeks. Thank you very much for your attention, and here are my contacts should you want more information about what we do. Over to you, Chiara.
Thank you so much, Simone. It was very inspiring to see also your presentation. I really like your comment about like how is important and how the health equality is very connected to spatial and environmental equality. And I think that's like we see it every day. And also on another topic, I also like your highlights on the fact that aesthetic of public space and biodiversity of public space, it's very connected to the role, to like let's say mental health, and also like immune systems of the youngers, let's say. I think this connects nicely with our next speaker, who's Dasha Moshenev. Dasha is a designer, researcher, and an urban designer. She works in the intersection of social and physical dimension of space. At ARUP, she works on projects involving play, cultures, inclusive cities, and interdisciplinary collaboration in designing. She is a participatory design specialist and experimenting with design processes in infrastructure and public space processes. So welcome, Dasha, and I will give you the floor. Okay, we see you.
Thank you very much, Chiara. Can you hear me as well?
Yes, we hear you as well now.
Perfect. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Dasha, and I would like to start by telling you a little bit about ARUP. So ARUP is an independent multidisciplinary firm of designers, planners, engineers, and technical specialists. It was founded 75 years ago, and we work across every aspect of the built environment with 16,000 professionals based in 92 offices across the world. What happens then in ARUP is that we get this chance to work across sectors and across silos, which I think helps us a lot to innovate in these spaces. So our topic today is public space for urban health. And I would like to present our work that sits in one of these intersections. So the intersection of two areas of knowledge and practice. One is climate change, resilience, and nature. And this is some of our work that we did in this space. And then the other one is child-friendly design and planning. So ARUP has been working for several years on a child-centered approach to urban planning and design. And as urban practitioners, we know that environment in which children live is a key factor to consider when talking about their well-being and development. But when we design spaces and places considering the needs of children, we also need to consider that children require not only basic and functional needs as good nutrition, healthcare, education, clean air, safe environment. They also need environment where they have plenty of opportunities to explore, to play, and to experience warm and responsive human interactions. So urban environment plays a very important role in children's mental health and physical health. Also, when we design for child and family, when we use this child and family friendly approach to design and planning, we then tap into this co-benefits bucket, so to say. So we then unite, we have this power then to unite a very broad range of agendas and generate multiple benefits, not only for children, but for entire society and more importantly for the planet. So some of them are listed here. So child-friendly cities also bring health and well-being benefits, boosting local economy, safety, safe cities, stronger communities, nature and sustainability benefits, climate resilience, and then therefore become a catalyst for improving cities. However, play is struggling to find a place in lives of many children today. Low play lives and play poverty are seen across all strata of society and socioeconomic levels. The barriers to play in cities are many and complex, and we can say that children have been increasingly designed out of cities, of streets, of public spaces, of housing estates. Also, there is limited evidence and knowledge on the state of play in cities and the role that cities play in child's development. So this is one of our spaces for advocating and for actually showing how it can be improved. So we identify two main concepts. to help creating more child-friendly cities. One of these concepts is the concept of everyday freedoms. So playful behaviors and freedom to play and explore should be part of every life throughout the city. This concept combines the ability to play, to be physically active, to socialize, and also brings the concept of independent mobility within cities. The second concept is the concept of children's infrastructure, considering the network of spaces, streets, nature, and interventions, which make up the key features of a child-friendly city. So this means looking beyond just playgrounds and instead promoting connected, multifunctional, intergenerational, sustainable public spaces that families and communities can enjoy together and can generate substantial range of benefits for all urban citizens. What we tend to forget is that this infrastructure, this infrastructure is as important as transport, energy, water, waste infrastructure. They're all equally important in the development of cities, sustainable development of cities. So today I would like to speak about nature-based play, which is one of the urban design concepts that we are working on that kind of comes from this intersection of different areas of work. And the work on this for us actually started at previous COP26, where we explored the connections between play, nature, and climate resilience, climate change, inviting a panel of experts to explore these linkages together. So we were thinking about how natural environments encourage children to develop a diversity of play experiences, how nature-based solutions can create healthier, more resilient, inclusive, and child-friendly cities. And also by fostering linkages between play and nature, is it possible to create and safeguard valuable ecosystem services? So the result is the demonstration that an integrated approach to climate resilience that combines nature with children's play can have transformational and wide-ranging benefits for society and for the planet. Cities in particular should aim to enhance a child's connection to nature through green and healthy environments. Children need spaces like parks, green areas that they can explore, in which they can feel safe and form attachments, both with other people and with the environment. A connection with the natural world is associated with a range of benefits. For example, lower rates of obesity, depression, stress and attention disorders. This connection is equally important to teach our kids to respect the environment and cultivate a love for nature. And here, as you can read this quote from David Attenborough, so what he said is that no one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they have never experienced. So it goes even beyond mental and physical health benefits. It goes into that investment into the future and the future activity of the future generations. So within the experts that we gathered actually discuss these topics here. So why nature in cities? So we have WWF that speaks about intimate relationships that cities have with our natural surroundings. Why does play matter? So Play Scotland speaks about the importance of play for children's happiness and well-being. The University of Glasgow is talking about the unique benefits of playing in and with nature, in which they also stress this very important difference between outdoor play and nature-based play. So playing outdoors has way less benefits than having like actual play in and with nature. FAM Studio explores this relationship between blue ecosystems and children's health and play in cities, because what the literature and the projects are telling us is that we tend to be more focused on the green infrastructure than on the blue infrastructure. But what also previous presenters and Chiara was speaking about was this combination of green and blue infrastructure. We also explored the topic of play in nature-based solutions. So that is this mainstream play nature-based solutions. And the perspective of Barcelona, which is really a pioneering city in this field, mainstreaming nature-based play in their strategies and projects. This way of gathering experts around this important topic has also this kind of side effect of creating these partnerships and really kind of coming together to invest our time and expertise in this very important space. And these are the main contributors to the publication, as well as the 11 case studies that we included. And I actually want to now dedicate a bit of time to speak about those case studies and demonstrate the benefits through a few examples. So 11 case studies that we chose to analyze as part of this publication are, as you can see, coming from different, very diverse geographies. They include different actors, and they are on different, focus on different scales of nature-based play. And they all demonstrate a range of specific design approaches and engagement activities that led to these co-benefits. So the first one I would like to mention is tactics for conservation of urban ravines and by Ciudad Emergente. This is a project that was implemented in Guatemala City. And what you can see here is that, they intervene in this ravine that is in the Guatemala City, is basically intersected by these ravines that are like fingers going all around the city, but they're unfortunately very neglected. They are used as like waste dumping grounds. People do not perceive their value. So what the project was about is activating different spots, as you can see here, this natural amphitheater, where people and children from surrounding schools can gather, mapping different pathways through ravines, and also creating safe access for people and children of different abilities. By doing this, what happens? So there are some climate and nature-based benefits, such as temperature and microclimate regulation, improved air quality, solid waste management, natural habitats and biodiversity safeguarding, urban soil regeneration, improved water quality, increased resilience to flooding, among others. But we also create benefits for children and the communities, such as strengthening their sense of place, giving more opportunities for playful learning, such as learning about their environment, for example. Increased social cohesion between these different neighborhoods that now can actually communicate through these pathways. Increased mobility, emotional connection with nature, and diverse and increased physical activity. So design intervention that can lead to these nature and children/community benefits. And yeah, maybe I would like to just read one of the findings from the project, which says that before the project, local kids played games, killing birds using slingshots. Afterwards, they became activists, calling for protection activities and using the maps to learn to identify different species of birds. Resident survey found a 30% increase in community awareness among neighbors and community members to conserve the ravines, and 89% reduction in indifference towards this area's degradation. This is one of the examples, one of the 11. Another one that I would just shortly touch upon is this very different project on very different scale. We are now going to New Zealand, so this is in Auckland. And very interestingly, as a different project in relation to the previous one, this one is funded by a developer, so Hobsonville Land Company, that was designing this big housing complex in the area. But they asked ISMUS to actually develop this play strategy. And it is an exemplary approach to incorporating nature-based play in a neighborhood master plan, actually. So we are talking about the play master plan here. And it demonstrates how designers and developers can create habitats for both people and wildlife. So not only thinking about people's needs. So as you can see, there is this, it's actually a circular pathway 4 kilometers long that links play destinations and playful encounters with nature and with some structures that are built on site, like this totem here that you can see on the picture, which is actually habitat for some insects and birds. So the strategy is made of 4 complementary play types. So temporary play, which is social with loose parts, like pieces that are coming, fruits and seeds that are falling from the trees. Then we have natural play, which is wild and exploratory. We have bespoke play, which is triggered by some destinations, like this one with a totem, and systemized or structured play, which includes rule-based play, like ball games, for example. But what they did is that they overlapped these 4 play types with 4 different landscapes: treetops, water, clay, and earth. And only that overlap creates enormous amount of possibilities for that really trigger our imagination and curiosity and put us out there to actually explore the world in which we live. I had a third case study, but I'm cautious of the time, so I will skip this one quickly and just you can read about it in the publication and just go to this closing slide in which we summarized. So the whole publication speaks about these benefits for nature and climate and for children and communities, but it also speaks about these approaches. So what can we actually do? Okay, we know this is important, we know we can benefit, but how can we approach nature? How can we approach the creation of nature-based play opportunities? And we identified 8 categories of approaches. Because the main aim was to help inspire and support collaboration and action between city authorities, urban planners, designers, and communities through highlighting these approaches. So the first one, transform perceptions of the community around the significance, value, and fragility of natural habitats and ecosystems. And you will see within each of these groups, there is a set of activities that someone can do. Second, enable proximity and access by consciously connecting people and natural landscapes, taking into consideration the needs of caregivers and young children of all abilities. Strengthen partnerships between different organizations and groups that are working on placemaking, environmental preservation, co-design approaches, children's rights, education, design innovation, etc. 4, diversify play through nature. So play is not one type of activity. Play is endless, offers endless possibilities. And we can do that through nature by emphasizing how different play experiences and design requirements can lead to development of very different skills to play, through play. So for example, cognitive skills, emotional skills, creative skills, etc. 5, connect with play heritage, which I didn't show you today the example of that, but it is super important across the globe. So through co-designing with local partners and stakeholders, following the intergenerational links and what we all think about play, through all play objects, but also through play practices and play traditions in specific locations. Celebrate change in the environment through seasons, through growth cycles, through long-term change. So the nature is not fixed in place. We design also for the change of it, and it's a very unique concept in design. Experiment publicly with different materials, construction processes, water-sensitive urban design, etc. And finally, growth facilitation of nature-based play. So help people to connect with it through guided, semi-guided activities, frequent activation of spaces. So design is only one component, one part of it. So yeah, I'll finish with the previous slide. I invite you to download the publication, explore it more, and of course, reach out if you have any questions or would like to collaborate further on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dasha. I was really like getting closer to the screen to try to read everything under each driver, but I will do it afterwards. And I think it's very important to focus on children because it's eventually these are really fragile organisms, right? So it really connects to nature and how we can shape our cities better to make it better for everyone. Thanks so much. And staying a bit on the social, let's say, component of urban health and how nature can be a part of it. I would like to introduce the next panelist, Funmi Adeniyi. Funmi works in ICLEI Africa as a people-centered right-based expert on different projects. She is a trainer. She's been trained as a lawyer and holds the PhD in law, specifically on human rights protection. She has more than a decade of cross-sectional experience in private sector and public and also academic spaces. So I will give her the floor and she will talk a bit more about the human rights components of nature-based solution. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who has gone ahead and laid the ground, and now I don't have to do too much of talking anymore. I found the presentations very interesting, actually very informative. Particularly as a person, I'm a lawyer, and sometimes people ask me, what are you doing at ICLEI? But that seems to have defined my story through my career life. I work at very intersectional spaces where I try to weave together the different problems and try to explain what exactly the human rights challenges are, because I firmly believe in human rights as a framework to addressing many of the challenges that we face today. And so through the presentations that happened, I'm like, oh, okay, that's a child rights problem. Oh, okay, that's a problem directly related to the right to the environment. Also, as a very intersectional specialist, I find that it's easier to convey messages through stories. And so today, more than a presentation, I'm actually going to be taking us through stories. Stories of where we find ourselves today on Earth, story and a particular story of what is currently working and how we could probably scale that up in our individual fields of work and in what we do. There was a saying that struck me very recently when I was reading something by Bayo Akomolafe. He's a great author. And it says, the times are urgent, let's slow down. By contrast, when things are urgent, the gut reaction is to actually stand up and pick up your pace. But this was particularly in relation to climate loss, biodiversity, the problems of pollution, all of which have been beautifully iterated today in the session. And it feels like we need to urgently do something. But slowing down in this regard doesn't come from a perspective of do nothing. It comes from a perspective of what have we done and why has it not worked? Or why is it not working? And we need to begin to rethink the hows of what we do. Do we need to begin to adopt a different kind of framework? A framework which addresses the problems, which by no means can be minimized in front of us, but doesn't also ignore people. A framework that centers people in response to the problems that we find ourselves. And the problems are many. I mean, I was reading a paper recently, and it struck me that we've actually lost 80% of the world's terrestrial biodiversity already. We literally are living on a time bomb, and whether you look at it in terms of declining species or the fact that every day it gets worse, and I mean the Earth in itself is telling us a story with the different climate events and the very adverse weather events that we're seeing all over the world every other week on the news. So today's story is one of the tripartite burden of biodiversity loss, of climate crisis, and of disease that is brought on by so many factors. And we can spend the day listing factors. Is from our insatiable consumption as a species to unsustainable production practices, disproportionate health climate, poverty and inequality burdens on certain populations as against the other. Something struck me in what Dasha said in her presentation, where she mentioned this idea of play poverty. Is actually something I've never really thought about. You can see that there's a problem with the way our cities are built. Kids can't play. They're disproportionately affected by our concept of designing cities. And that effect has a chain reaction on not just the fact that they can't play, but also their physical and their mental well-being. And there are multiplicity of drivers, as we've heard from all of the presentations. It's demographic, it's technological, it's political, it's institutional, it's economic. They all are interconnected, and they continue to exhibit the effects of nature and gender and human rights deprivations. Broken systems, just like the food system, is driven by multiple factors that continue to affect human beings very differently. Now, the effect of this broken system, say, of a white male living in, say, for instance, Sweden, is different from the effect on a Black rural woman living in somewhere like Lesotho. And in our responses to what faces us today as a people, as humans, we have to be very aware of these differing effects. The COVID-19 pandemic, I see it as the signal that if our current stories must change, then we must refocus human and gender rights in our nature-based solutions as key to unlocking urban health, or even just generally planetary health. And while we look at nature-based solutions, and we've seen fabulous examples in the presentations that have gone ahead today to address many of today's urban challenges, our framework for mainstreaming nature-based solutions lies at the nexus of human rights on the one hand and of gender rights on the other hand, simply because there can be no human rights without humanity, and human rights in and of themselves are interdependent. So of all of the presentations, you find the one human rights challenge links perfectly with the other human rights challenge. And many times people, particularly when you work in global South context, the response when you want to introduce discourses around gender rights is, can't we just talk about human rights and leave gender rights alone? And this is why I emphasize human and gender rights working hand in hand. Because you cannot guarantee human rights if you don't guarantee gender rights. And the experiences around the world continue to tell us this story, that many countries that do not place a premium on the guarantee of gender rights, that is where you actually find the flagrant abuse of many human rights issues. We must continue to remind ourselves that humans, just the same way the climate crisis, the biodiversity loss, the air pollution, humans are at the center of this all, and we're worried about what to do. Humans remain at the center of human rights. It's not some idealistic goals that we should be thinking of, tick boxing, which is mainly the approach in many projects, but it's actually thinking through the whole continuum of projects, of the financing, of everything we do, and asking ourselves the very important question: how are we centering humans in this? So I just put here many of the SDGs, and this is not exhaustive, that actually weave together human and gender rights and nature-based solutions. The fact that the SDGs themselves are hinged against the recognition of their interconnectedness. And this is a principle which underlines a human rights-based approach. It just tells us that successfully addressing urban health stems from an understanding that the health of people is linked directly to the health of their ecosystem. And nature-based solution as a catalyst for revitalizing the ecosystem can only be successful when driven not just from a development agenda, but from an agenda that centers humans and humans' vulnerability. Now, access to natural, so how do we do this? I think that's the question, because many people say, okay, so we talk about human rights, we talk about gender rights in nature-based solutions. So my story goes on to say, this is how we do it, but I'll also be giving you a case study, an example of how we're successfully doing it in one of our projects at ICLEI. First is the fact that giving access to natural resources as a human right for all. This links directly between the fact that people not having access is directly linked to health outcomes for them. And I think Dasha's presentation is a perfect example for them. But also the presentation that Simone also gave, and how people's inability to access green spaces has a telltale effect on their everyday lived experiences, including their health. It's also learning from and embedding local knowledge systems. Now, I'm very wary about using the word including local knowledge systems, because that feels very much like a tick box approach. We should move away from just the inclusion of local knowledge systems to actually embedding the systems. Why? Because for many centuries before the era and the dawn of modernization, local people have been stewards of indigenous knowledge, and they have successfully, research has shown that for centuries, they successfully protected biodiversity. So what went wrong? And this goes back to Bio's statement about the times of urgent slowdown. What went wrong, and how do we begin to, rather than include local knowledge, embed local knowledge? Also the fact that in many local, and I think that many of us can recollect how growing up, you probably had a cot and your mom went to the back of the house, put some leaves together, dropped something on your cot, and you were fine. That's a nature-based solution. And women have always been custodians of indigenous knowledge systems. Yet, women continue to be the highest burden bearers of the impacts of the many climate crisis and biodiversity loss that we see. We must begin to very consciously shift that narrative. How? By including women, not just including women, embedding women and ensuring their participation in our responses. But it's also about accountability and addressing power imbalances. Climate change, unfortunately, has skewed power imbalances, and it continues to do so and drive inequality, not because this is a new thing, it just shows us very clearly that inequality and continues to drive it. Now, the imbalance in access to resources, including climate and biodiversity financing between the global north and the global south, is something that needs to be addressed. But there's also the aspect of accountabilities of states and non-state actors that has led us to this point in our stories, and how we need to begin to address that through programs, through policies, through intentional actions, through on-the-ground movements, and building those movements. And so today I want to give you an example of something we've done at ICLEI. I'm very fortunate, and I say fortunate because this has been a learning process for me to have project managed UNA, and is still a project that is ongoing. It's one of ICLEI Africa's legacy projects, and the project has been on since 2014. It's called the Urban Natural Assets Program, and we've had different iterations of the program, and we're currently in the third phase. And this third phase seeks to transform the development trajectories for African cities towards those that improve sustainable development of an interconnectedness with their natural systems across three main pillars: governance, planning, and finance. But we pull this together by using a human rights-based framework. And like I said, it's been ongoing since 2014. However, we started this new phase, which adopts a human rights-based framework in 2021. Now, these are the cities where UNA is active across the continent. But in this phase, we're particularly focused in terms of implementation in both cities, in Sierra Leone and in Cape Coast in Ghana, both West African cities. However, we continue to drive the work that UNA has done in the rest of our cities. Now, what has been our approach? One, centering humans and centering gender rights across the three main pillars. Our framing is that human rights are all-encompassing, and we found ways to mainstream that in everything we do. Very interesting story. Over the last year, we've done quite an extensive amount of urban natural assets mapping, but also very closely linked to socioeconomic surveys. And our socioeconomic surveys, for instance, in Cape Coast covered over 1,200 households. Now, you ask yourself, when you have a technical team with different skill sets, how do we begin to overlay a human rights-based approach on all of this? And I remember having a conversation with our mapping team. And for me, I don't know how to intersect human rights and mapping. And I'm like, well, that's why you're here, to think through it and to begin to think about what are the considerations. And I'm so excited for us to be able to publish the maps that have come out at the end of this year of UNA that actually draws a human rights-based approach and superimposes that on top of the spatial mapping that we've done of the urban natural assets. But that's an aside. So how have we done this successfully? First, we found inclusion and participation as key to forging solutions. We have these wonderful things called learning labs. And our learning labs in and of themselves are truly learning labs because we do not enter those cities as the experts. We enter there as co-creators, trying to understand what is the current situation and what people within those localities hope for. And so we have these multi-stakeholder dialogues and learning process, which onboards local and indigenous knowledge. And the wealth of knowledge that has come forth, if you look at the second picture on the right, you would see some traditional leaders. We have a wide array of stakeholders within our meetings, traditional leaders, city officials, market women, and then we also have the technocrats, everybody. What we're conscious of is ensuring that within those spaces, we break down power imbalance so that everybody is an active participant. But we also focus on the inclusion of very key groups, and we want to hear their voices because we truly believe that the decision-making process doesn't start when councillors sit around the table to decide how, where, when. We believe that it starts from equipping people with the knowledge on how to advocate and how to escalate what the concerns are to regional, to national, even to global levels. All our stakeholders have been involved in the decision-making process on this project. When we did the spatial mapping, we actually brought it back into what we had done. We brought that process back into the learning labs. Is this a true representation of your city and of the urban natural assets you're aware of in your city? We shared the results of the socioeconomic surveys with them to get their feedback, just to be able to ground truth. Also, it's about co-creating with stakeholders, evidence-based for policy advocacy. So I've spoken to the socioeconomic survey. While on our part, and ICLEI has this niche of being very directly related to many local governments around the world, and particularly in Africa, within the Africa, and the two cities we're working with are also member cities. But to be able to push for evidence-based change in the policy, we need to come from a perspective where we have the evidence to be able to show policymakers. This is what the evidence currently says. This is what we think needs to be addressed. And the last point is also on building stakeholders' awareness of human and gender rights considerations in nature-based solutions through innovative methods. And I just want to spend a bit of time speaking to this. Is first also in the approaches that we use when we try to center people. Many times when you work in global South context, there is almost a barrier when you raise discourses around human and gender rights generally, because people feel that those are discourses that originated from the West. And so what we had to do to be able to introduce this and to have our stakeholders embrace it was to vernacularize human rights using traditional folklore within those communities. So for instance, we said in Cape Coast, tell us a folklore that predates colonization. And we sat around the table and began to trace within the folklores different elements of human rights so that people could actually connect. It's a question of being able to meet people where they are. And so, yes, it may not have been iterated as human rights in African indigenous societies, but those elements were always there. And from there, build on the knowledge of human rights up until where we currently are with regards to the right to a safe, healthy, and sustainable environment. And I must say that one of our most interesting sessions within, and yes, I know I am biased, within our learning labs are usually the human rights sessions, because you see people come alive, you see people able to connect those discourses with their lived realities as Africans in these cities. It's also breaking down gender stereotypes, and that's very dicey for very deeply patriarchal societies. And the two cities we happen to be blessed with this year are very deeply patriarchal societies. And so we said, what do we do? So we spent a bit of time collecting proverbs that are very indigenous, proverbs known within these cities. And we had a day of sitting down to analyze these proverbs within our learning labs, to begin to speak around how these proverbs continue to drive gender stereotypes and gender biases, and how that directly relates to the lack of inclusion of women within decision-making forums. Some of our socioeconomic surveys shows that within decision-making forums, as little as only 12% of women are represented. But if you don't go back to the roots of why, the whys are located in the norms, in the traditions, in the cultures. And until people begin to understand how to truly challenge these, then all we're going to be doing will be a window dressing thing. Finally, is also building the capacity of right holders. Like I said, our learning labs are very multi-stakeholder, so we have different kinds of people. But we've also been very conscious about the narrative not being just about us, getting feedback from what are the things that you would like, while the city officials are there, that you would like your city officials to prioritize. How do we get you from the point where you are to actually get to the point where you're able to dialogue with your city officials towards the prioritization of certain things, specifically with regards to the nature-based solutions that we're beginning to identify and some of the socioeconomic problems that are deeply entrenched in that. To end this, I would say it's been a learning process for us, and I believe for the cities themselves. But the one thing that I'd like to remind each and every one of us who work in this field and who are trying in our individual ways to change the world is that humans remain at the center of all that we're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Funmi. I really appreciate that. We always bring up also the attention to the gender, that it's very, very connected to urban health when it comes to safety and human rights through also, this discussion. Okay, thank you so much. I see we are running out of time, so we have a last panelist, and just remind them to remain in the time slot. I would like to introduce Lin Mi and Hu Peiru. They are both working for the Wuhan Natural Resource Conservation and Utilization Center. As Li is an urban planner and Hu is an assistant planner. Li's main research direction is ecological restoration, ecological greenway, and land policy, while Hu is mostly focusing on urban planning, ecological greenway, and land policy. I will give the floor to Li to talk a bit about their work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Sorry, I need to share my. So can you see my screen now?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Okay, hello everyone. It's very glad to share our practice of urban large green public space improvement in Wuhan Donghu Greenway. And I would like to introduce our city and also the our Easter Lake first. And Wuhan is in the core city of China and covers an area of more than 8,000 square kilometers with a population of 10 million. And the city is divided into 3 towns. We can see Hankou, Hanyang, and Wuchang towns by the Yangtze and Han River. And our Easter Lake is located between the 2nd and 3rd circle lines, which is very close to our city center. And during these years, the lake has translated from a suburban lake to a lake in the city. And the water and the surrounding green areas are the key elements that form the Easter Lake landscape area. So to start this project, we were thinking that the Donghu Greenway is not only a greenway, but also the dream of its 10 million citizens for the city and their future. So to achieve this goal, we've made 4 efforts. And first is to increase continuity and reachability by establishing the greenway network that penetrates important public spaces. We were thinking about not only in the Easter Lake, but also the city area that are surrounding our greenway. So we try to connect the important cities, like suburbs, like college and the universities, like the lakes and the mountains, some parks and public centers, that we create the regional greenway system. And now we have our greenway in Donghu. Besides, we built multi-functional greenway gateways, which has the functions that with the transport hub, which can serve the service facilities and also the gateway image. Now we take the South Gateway as an example, because we can see that the South Gateway is in the very center of the Donghu, of the Easter Lake. So because of its central location, it's really have many problems before. We can find that it's not easy for the visitors to enter the city because the entrance is not easy to find, and the surrounding landscape is not that good, and also the traffic is in chaos. So through the planning guidance of function, transportation, and landscape, and now we've achieved the design blueprint and attained the goal of integration of lake and urban landscape. Secondly, we strengthen practical and activity experience by advocating scenic spots for free. We can see the scenic spots in the very middle area. It's called Moshan scenery, which accounted for about 17% of the Easter Lake scenic spot ticket sales for the whole year. We made it free for all the people so that people can get free in the very core center of our Easter Lake, and everyone can be more easily to get close to our Easter Lake. And we try to create communication space, increasing the public space. In the very first phase of our project, we try to make 4 themes of our greenway and 20 themes activity spaces. And now we have the greenway on the lake, in the field between the lake and the hill, and the greenway on the lake. And we take the Lake Heart Island as an example. it is to have a single tourism function. And we add some amphitheater, ecological island, beach, view tower, comprehensive station. And after that, it's become a vibrant and popular space now. And all people can camping here, not only in the daytime, but also at night. And we can make some like the barbecue here. We can have the music festival here. And now we have the hot air balloon, which can help people to see the scenery of our Eastern Lake in the mid-air. And we create ecological, comfortable public spaces by improving the ecological environment. We try to build ecological gentle slopes, recover the ecological landform, protect and recovering the vegetation along the greenway, and implementing water system interaction project. Also, we consider about our security when we are under our greenway. So we established the intellectual security system. To achieve the function of real-time monitoring of the whole area, multi-channel alarms, and terminal emergency linkage. And also we create ecological comfortable public spaces by provide security road section. We try to reconstruction the road section. We can see the picture in the before that there are more space for the car and the narrow space for people with bicycles or on the foot. And now there is no car, and people with their bicycles and can enjoy all the greenway. And focusing on the needs of different groups, the measure is providing supporting facilities for different groups. We try to provide a system of service stations that can meet the needs of different groups. We think about the senior people, the disabled people, women and children, bicyclists, and also the visitors. So here is a very small service station that can provide food, water, and also can have the toilets here, and people with who are working on our greenway or with their bicycles, they can have a rest here. And because as I said before, because our Eastern Lake is in the very center of the city, so there have many residents here. And before this project, we were thinking that we are not going to let the residents to move their hometown, but we wanted them to stay here and to live here and also to work here. So we provide ecological tourism employment opportunities. We try, people who are the residents here can be the guidance here, or they can do their own business here. So it's really promoting the overall development of the area. And with all these great efforts, we are able to provide a comfortable and a pleasant public space for the citizens in Wuhan. And they are embodied in 4 aspects. First, returning land to lake and recovering vegetation. After that, the total amount of trees increased by 53,000 and total repelled area is about 10 square kilometers. And secondly, we prohibit motor vehicles and give pedestrian and cyclists a priority. And thirdly, we add the pedestrian walkways and recover ecological embankments. And now we have the waterfront recreation banks now, and it's not only to help the city and also the It's a lake to recover the nature, but help the people to have the public space and to be more close to our nature. And the most important, it is very being loved by the citizens here, and the record number of tourists per day has existed 50,000. And now our Donghu, our East Lake has a traditional festival from 2016, which is called Jump Donghu, which means that everyone can jump into the lake during this special time. And we also have many other activities here, like the summer markets, like the live show and weekend camping here. And in the very final, I would like to share a short vlog, which record my experience in this summer time. And here is a very short vlog here, and we can see how people enjoy the public space here and in our summertime or in other times. I don't know if anyone can hear the music. So here is the summer market, and also we have the live show. And all the people are enjoying the time here. And I really thank you for watching, and we welcome all of you to Donghu. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think it's also really nice to close a bit the session with a good example of how we can apply all these things, especially in a city like Wuhan that has been like particularly careful about, especially after the pandemic, about how to treat the public spaces. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for everyone for your contribution. I think we're running a little bit out of time. I don't know if you think you would like to maybe go through one of the questions very quickly and close the discussion with maybe just a reflection, and otherwise I can also wrap up the conversation. But let's challenge you. I'm gonna just open the floor about one question that Jose has mentioned at the beginning that I think is relevant and it's also important, and maybe some of you can share their ideas on it very, very briefly. I think there's a lot of cities that has already green public spaces around the world. I'm looking, for instance, at Nairobi, which is my house, but also other cities. There are a lot of like public space that are not like accessible or used. And my question to you is how can we improve the access and the usability of those green public spaces in urban areas that often are like swamp areas or like our riverside that are not healthy spaces? How can those become actually like an asset for our cities? I'll leave it to you, and any volunteers that wants to start. Simone, yes.
I'm Italian, I always volunteer, right? It's part of our nature. No, I think, well, let's say I know there are many different ways and I think many different answers to your question, but to me, a concept that I always like is that of placemaking. So basically, you have a space which is not used or not accessible, and you have to turn that space into a place. And the best way to do that is to work with the people that live and could potentially use that space to really go through a co-design, co-planning, co-design and co-management process. So basically empower the people around the area to make it happen. I think that's what happened in Nairobi. The specific example you gave is what happened in Karura. In the Karura National Forest, the people took charge. It became a joint project and people designed or managed the place together. So I think if we can turn a space into a place, that would be a way to make it more accessible, more usable for people. Over.
Thanks. Thank you, Simone. Anyone else with some
Maybe
ideas?
I could add on.
Please.
I agree with the placemaking, but I would also like to challenge that a little bit in the sense that we have to, I think, become very aware of these spaces, but not always to access them. For example, swamps are so important for habitats of many different species, and maybe we don't need to barge into every single space. Like, we can also leave them as they are, because they are very important because of some reasons. And I really like the previous presentation, but the question I had in mind was, you showed us so many social numbers and impacts, but I was wondering also if you were measuring the some biodiversity points, like did you have some measures that were measuring maybe, I don't know, the quality of water, or maybe some returns of some species to the eastern lake, etc., in relation to my comments?
Lee, would you like to address that question? The question, if it's clear, is like, if did you use any measurements or criteria to evaluate the environmental improvements of the project, not only the social improvements, in terms of like number of species, number of biodiversity? Yeah.
Yes. We through this project, we we are not only think about the social elements, but also about how to recover our like the water and also the trees here. So with the Greenway project, we first of all, we try to recover our water to make it more clear, and also the fishes and other species that in the water too. And also, and for the trees and the plants here, we think about different themes. So we try to make the themes of the Greenway with different trees and some other plants to make it more interesting and more nature to our more natural. So so here is the efforts that we have done through this project. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Lee.
If I can jump back,
I don't know
Chiara,
if
I was
there's
not
any
suggesting that we make every space into a place. So, of course, it's that, you know, natural spaces really need to be remain natural, but a lot of spaces that are abandoned or left, let's say, unattended, could be turned into places. So, of course, I agree with Dasha. It's not, you know, we're not going to turn a jungle into a public space if necessary, unless it's. But, anyways, just to clarify that.
Yeah, no, that was a very important contribution, Dasha. I think we cannot make everything accessible. There are some things that have a function as they are, and they're important to be conserved. Okay, is there any other question that you would like, or any comment that you have between the presentation of each other? I would like just maybe open the floor to you before I wrap up.
Maybe one last comment again.
Yeah, and then
I had, you know, several discussions recently with, you know, public administrations and local authorities, and I think the key challenge we are facing, I mean, at least I am facing, and I'm sure some of you are also, is how do we change the paradigm? So how do we see green spaces, urban forest, or nature-based solutions as an investment, not as a cost? I think that's probably the biggest challenge, to sort of convince people that, you know, they're actually investing in health and happiness, and not just spending public money on nice little trees around the city. So just a final consideration.
That's a good consideration, and I wonder if anyone has some tips around that or encounter some strategies. Jose.
No, actually, no, I think it was a very good point, like from Simone. I was going to refer more like to the previous question, but I think like this is quite key. Also, like working like with local governments. One of the key questions that they ask us is like also on the maintenance of public space, no? So because like some governments has like a sort of resources like to upgrade the public space, but not to maintain it. So I think like the financial mechanism like to maintain like these investments on public space and management, I think is fundamental. But I think like what Simone was addressing is also how to change the mindset. No, it's like it's not a cost; it's an investment for health and like for mental, physical health, but also like for the well-being of the citizens, and also it can generate like some returns. I wanted to also to go back a little bit like from our experience very quickly. I wanted to raise a couple of points on what are the challenges like when we are talking about green spaces, and I think one of them is like equity, like the accessibility to these spaces, and actually like the case of Wuhan, like they released that the fee like to enter to this park. I think this is quite important. Another example, like for example from Guadalajara, Simone, that you were there, like a Bosque Colomos or like a Colomos forest, where they change or they had like a closed space. They were charging like for the entrance, and then like basically like they open the park and the forest like for free for everyone, but charging like for the ones going like with a car for the parking fees. No, so I think like we have to also like to be able like these spaces like to everyone. And the other challenge that we are having like when we're talking about greening is like the land grabbing that is existing, like urbanizations over protected areas. So I think like this is a challenge. Even Chiara, when you were mentioning about Nairobi, it's like we have mapped like the existing green spaces. A lot of them are like over like a private land, or and then it's like even like the one that is over public land. It's like we have been having like the challenge of encroaching of that public land. No, so I think like these are two considerations, also like to have in the future. That is at least like from the planning perspective quite important, and like maybe like how to address on these ones. Over to you, Chiara.
In fact, Jose, I was at Parque Los Colomos on Friday morning. So I know exactly. I just shared a paper we wrote on access and accessibility to green spaces on social inclusiveness and environmental justice, if you want to take a look.
These links in the chat, so feel free, anyone else also to share. I see the hands of Funmi. Hi, Hap, would you like to share some comments?
Yes, just a quick response. And I don't know if this comes as a solution, specifically with regards to the question by Borelli on changing mindsets and beginning to see green spaces as an investment, but also beyond green spaces, and on the one hand, is also finding how to make an investment. So like I had said, under our UNA program, we have 3 arms, and one of the arms there is on financing. And what we've been trying to do actually is to look at developing an investment case for nature. I can't say we have the answers yet, but I can say that at least we're asking the right questions on how do you develop an investment case for nature or for natural assets to be able to drive funding in that regard. And the experience, and this relates back to what Jose had mentioned, and specifically the challenges with local government, saying the initial investment comes, but the sustainability of that investment, particularly within the cities. And that's another thing. It's not just about the once-off investments, but it's also about how those investments are sustained. And I know that some of that goes back to a co-creative process with people on the ground, with the cities, with community members. But I think that these are very important questions that need to be raised at forums such as these and also beyond this. But maybe where we need to begin is probably developing these investment cases. And in developing the investment cases, particularly the investment cases for maybe at national government level, is to be thinking around the amount that is offset against the public health bills being redirected into the development of green spaces and of our natural assets. So that was just a thought that came.
Thanks a lot. I think it's very urgent that we try to build this case because as Jose was mentioning also, there's a lot about maintenance that people or municipality probably are scared of, and this is very linked to the case. Okay, I think because of time, I'm gonna close the session. I think it was very inspiring, at least for me, and quite interesting to get to know also about some post-COVID, so to say, thoughts around this. I think there's been a lot of information, and there's a lot of entry points when it comes to public space and urban health and the nature-based solution, especially, let's say, focusing on the 4 points that Simone was mentioning. So air pollution, physical activity and inactivity, immunity system, and mental health. There is, as we just mentioned, a big connection between our health, our routine, and how our cities are planned, and the cost of healthcare, and how can this be reconsidered and also reinvested to create a new green solution that can eventually prevent even more those diseases, and kind of like a situation that would improve or degrade urban health. I think it was also very inspiring to hear about some like a social perspective, and how an entry point can be focusing on specifically vulnerable groups that are particularly fragile in when it comes to public spaces and when it comes to urban health, particularly children's, but also women and girls. And I think this could also become an entry point on how to strengthen urban health through nature-based solution. And eventually, yeah, it was very nice to see that this is possible through the example of Wuhan. I'll thank you, everyone, for this great session. We're gonna share the links of the registration and the chat, so you can see all the links that have been copied. And I wish you all a good evening and the rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.